Thanks for tuning in to the Women's Vibrancy Code, a podcast dedicated to helping women move from exhausted to energized, balance their hormones, and feeling turned on by their life, their lover, and themselves. I'm your host, Maraya Brown. I'm a Yale and functional medicine trained women's health expert, midwife, mom, keynote speaker, and self-made entrepreneur. I'm the founder of my signature program, the Women's Vibrancy Code. So sit back, relax, and let's chat about your energy, hormones, libido, and embracing your feminine power. Oh, and you might want to have pen and paper to take some notes on some of these episodes. I have the amazing Bessi Graham with me today. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Maraya Brown, entrepreneur, founder, women's hormones and passion specialist. And Bessi and I are going to weave and talk about various things. For those of you listening on the Women's Vibrancy Code podcast, welcome. Off camera, Bessi and I were thinking vision, impact, and wealth without burnout. I think we're going to talk about how we merge meaning, impact, and success. And Bessi Graham is an amazing expert to have this conversation. Let me read her bio, and then we're going to get into the conversation. And of course, we have some ideas around where we'll go. And I just always trust the conversation goes exactly where it needs to. So Bessi Graham is the CEO and co-founder of Benefit Capital and creator of the Jasper Blueprint. I will say up front, I've had the opportunity to go through the Jasper Blueprint program with her as a CEO to help me really get clarity on what is the meaning and impact and what is my vision statement and mission and how does that go back to my origin story. And it's been a really phenomenal experience. Bessi is a business and leadership strategist with over 20 years experience from the grassroots of sitting in the dirt, working with business owners across the Pacific Islands through to the United Nations in Geneva. The ability to bridge the systemic and the practical is one of her superpowers. You'll also hear once she starts talking that she joins us from Aussie land, the amazing Australia. Bessi, welcome.
Thank you so much. Very excited to be chatting with you about this all today.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to add regarding your life's experience, your business experience, and kind of expertise for people to go, why would I listen to this conversation?
Sure. I mean, you touched in the bio there on this idea of one of the elements that I'm very passionate about is bridging big systemic challenges or issues down with the practical aspects of what it takes grassroots for us to lead in our organizations or communities or families. And that is a really important aspect of this. And I think the only other piece I would add is just the element of my passion and love for supporting leaders is really central to the work I do with businesses. So while the pattern across all of the businesses that I've built and led is really that aspect of how do we awaken the possibility for people that you can merge money and meaning, you can do these things together, I am just as passionate about ensuring we support the leaders running organizations because the pieces that you spoke about at the beginning of impact without burnout and all of these elements that make life meaningful and give us that experience of fulfillment, they are really important and often overlooked when people just fall into having a business conversation. So I just want to reassure people that I'm not coming at this from how do we grow and scale in a really aggressive fashion? It's from that place of wanting people to experience more meaning in their life and have that purpose to what they do, not just how do we build a great business.
Yeah. And, I think of you predominantly as a business strategist, and you've helped very large organizations and big names that many people would recognize. You've crossed over huge financial milestones that many people would dream of. But there's a grounding about this. So for those that are listening, if you are a just starting entrepreneur, if you're a CEO, if you're someone who has a vision of wanting to change your trajectory in how you add value in the world and share your gifts in the world, and you want it to also monetize, but to be attached to meaning. This is a great conversation to listen to. And, many people that I talk to, they feel like they're just burning the candle at both ends, doing the clock in, clock out, make the money. But they don't actually, at the end of the day, hang their hat on knowing that a rising tide lifts all boats, and they're part of that tide that they know without a shadow of a doubt is going to elevate the world to be what we want it to be. And I think that that's where you're able to really merge the two.
Yeah. And I think there's if you think about it, in many of the conversations that I know you have and that draw people to listen to you, there's this element and the internal work and the self-expression of how do we start to heal and reconnect and show up more fully as ourselves. And I think this conversation is actually the same work, but it's moving it over into the realm of what we're doing in our businesses or in the organizations we work in, and saying the same types of conversations need to occur over there, because that disconnect that is at the heart of what I think drives us to a place of feeling disillusioned, of getting to a place of burnout in our work, is because we have compartmentalized those aspects. And so we're saying, oh no, I'm just over here wearing the hat of how do I provide for my family, or how do I make as much money as I can. Then I flip back into, I go home and I'm wearing a different hat, which is I'm trying to be, doing the personal work and showing up more fully. And it's like, we have to bring those worlds together. We spend the bulk of our time and energy and money out there, either running our own businesses or leading in someone else's business. That is so central and such a massive part of our lives, that having them and seeing them as these compartmentalized, siloed pieces is what's making us exhausted and overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And at one point you said over there, like this compartmentalization, do you think for most people it's home versus work, or it's self versus with others? Like, where is the over there? What is the compartmentalization?
Well, I think we do it in so many areas. We almost, even in that phrase that we use of like, which hat are you wearing? It's as if you're a different, like, oh, I'm in mother mode, or I'm in CEO mode, and it's like the aspects that I love doing for people. And it's, you and I have had many of these conversations where it's the zooming out and just pulling in a whole bunch of different parts of who you are, or parts of your origin story that you mentioned before. When we zoom out enough and think about the whole and start to spot those patterns, we're then able to pull them back together and say, oh, it actually doesn't matter if I'm in mothering mode, CEO mode, where I am. There are elements that should be non-negotiable and are fundamental to who I am. And I want that to be consistent across the board. And it doesn't mean that there aren't different situations where we have different roles or responsibilities. It's not saying that we can't discern what's required of us in those situations. But one of the frameworks that I've developed, particularly in the last sort of 15 or so years of my work, is a piece that I call the two camps trap. And it's around this idea in a business setting where we have this sense that when we go into work or we're in that business setting, it's about how do we make sure we're making more money than it costs to make that. It's about the profit maximization, ignoring how we make the money. And then when we step into those conversations of, I want to contribute, I want to feel that there's meaning and purpose in my life, it's as if the business might enable us to contribute. So if we have profit, or we've made more money, or we've been able to retire or sell the business, there's an element of, yes, the business enabled me to contribute, but we're not connecting the dots around, how did we make that money in the first place? What does that look like? And so My work is always about saying, let's shift over to what I call the internal camp, where we're looking at those everyday decisions, where we're looking at how we already spend money, how we spend our time, how we prioritize, and make sure those things are in alignment. So I think that the separation, the over there, over here, plays out in all the aspects of our lives. And it's because we haven't taken the time to sit with and answer what I think are really foundational questions that then inform and give us what I call filters for our decision making, because part of the overwhelm is you can't filter. So all of the decisions in front of you feel like they're equally important. There's 150 decisions rather than there's actually only 15. Like we can cut out most of them.
Oh my gosh, I feel like as a CEO, every time I turn around, I'm being offered this speaking opportunity, this mastermind, this coach, this agency, various pitches, so to speak. Yeah. And I found doing the Jasper blueprint that it offered some grounding and kind of a long-term game to really create a filter and a lens through which to look at opportunities that come up. And rather than chasing shiny objects or, oh, there's a squirrel, to go, all right, wait a minute. Does this really align with what I've established as my foundational mission?
Yeah.
And, it also reminds me when I was first reading Seed of the Soul and just kind of developing a relationship with Gary Zukov, there was a part in I don't remember what chapter it was, but it was really like what I heard was there's people can make wealth and do good with their wealth in the world through philanthropy and donations and that kind of thing. But what if we can do good as we accumulate the wealth?
Exactly.
And it feels like that's the crux of what you're creating. Do you think that most of the business leaders that you interact with, when they first come into your world, really are burnt out and exhausted and disillusioned?
I think far more are than they're publicly admitting. Yes. The private answer to that is yes. Because one of the things that would make people probably be surprised by that is on the surface, it would look like, wow, you've got it all together, but their business is extraordinary and they're successful by all external measures. The consistent piece that plays out, though, is part of the hesitation and part of why it gets to such a place, an extreme place for people, is that it's hard to admit that this isn't working when you are so used to and known as the person who has it all together and who has spent a lifetime in those patterns and building up an identity and a persona as the go-to person with the answers. So I think now the piece to be, I don't really know what the right word is, but a bit gentle with that statement, though, is to say what I'm not saying is that they've fallen apart and they're hopeless and there's something terribly wrong that is broken in them. What I'm saying is that it is at that place of the acknowledgement that this is not sustainable. I am exhausted and I cannot continue like this. Like that's a different place. So it's not that it's a smaller group of people who are in that, okay, ready to set fire to everything. It's all disastrous. But I definitely, for the bulk of people in this space of established leaders where they're needing to and wanting to engage with this type of work, it is from that realization that what got them here is not how they want to live in this next chapter.
Right.
It's just,
Well, and I imagine it's not just the exhaustion and the time and the energy and the outpouring, but if it foundationally is started and built on just profit, it seems like an inevitable breaking point of lack of fulfillment.
Yeah. And
it's kind of like really selling their soul to the devil kind of thing.
I think that's what it can feel like. What is exciting is that for most people, I love helping them actually identify what is already present, because in almost all situations, you're way closer to the pieces that are important to you, what that contribution is, what meaning and purpose are for you. People are just not conscious of it, which goes right back to our conversation around what's this disconnect for people. Where are those silos happening? Part of why I frame the work and talk about in the initial interactions these ideas of the two camps trap, or our understanding and often unconscious belief about what the purpose of business is. The feeling like, oh my goodness, this is built on profit or it's not meaningful, or the selling your soul to the devil kind of comments, that comes because we have just unconsciously accepted that the purpose of business is profit maximization, that if I'm running a good business, that's what it's about. When we do those explorations that help you zoom out, that help you look at the origin stories of why did you set this up? What drew you in the first place to do this work? How have you been prioritizing or making decisions? People are so close to the aspects that make it meaningful for them. And often it is that shift to making explicit, making conscious and intentional the pieces that are already present, which then completely transforms your experience of that business. So I don't actually think people are necessarily as far away from it as they think they are. But if you go to, the wisdom of something like the beautiful Bhagavad Gita and the classic there where Krishna talks about that, it doesn't matter if you're an inch or a mile away from your Dharma, the experience is the same. Like if you're not consciously living it out, it doesn't actually matter how close you are. You will not sort of have that feeling or experience of fulfillment. So I think that's an important distinction to make, because I don't actually think people are as far away as they think they are.
And it seems like the starting point, tell me if you agree here, is that it's a return back to what are my values?
Yeah. And that, again, is a conversation that for most people has never been done in a really meaningful, reflective way, because values, like lots of other foundational elements, have been turned into these pieces that are token, or that we do. The amount of times, Maraya, where I've done values exercises with organizations and then they've admitted afterwards that they did a Google search and found their values on Google.
Oh no.
Okay. It's interesting that you admitted that.
Chat GPT told me mine.
Yes. Or who will say, I've never done a values exploration with an organization where they haven't changed what they had articulated, because not once have I come across a leader or a business where they've really gone deep on some of the elements that my experience would show help values shift into being pieces that actually inform us and our team on how we want to behave, how we want to show up, how we actually make decisions. And so those elements, what is interesting is, at a surface level, a lot of people, when you say that, okay, well, it starts with your values, they'd say, yeah, we've got our company values articulated, or we know what those are and we share them with the team on quarterly retreats and offsites, or, so people think they have them, and yet they are quite generic. They're not descriptive, and they're certainly not at that personalized level of where someone on your team would hear you describe them and get that excitement of oh my goodness, that is us. That describes who we are. That is my experience here.
Well, I also felt like, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go for it.
When we were going through my Jasper blueprint and digging into values, was it, I don't remember his name, Cialdini? What's the guy's name?
Lencioni, Patrick Lencioni.
Patrick Lencioni, and listening to one of his podcast episodes, and it brought me to, it's not just about those stereotypical Chat GPT company values where you go into Walmart or Nike and see them on, but it actually brought me to, what if I have a conversation in my family and sit down with all 5 of us to actually say, what are our core values? The visual that I kept seeing was the cairns, if for those that love to hike. Yeah. Remember, we talked about this. You're hiking, and especially if you're above the tree line and you have those piles of rocks, and that becomes the visual of knowing that you're on the path. And if there's, say, 5 rocks piled, to go, all right, as a family unit, what are our 5 core values that are our cairns, so that we know that we're on the path? And then to compare that to, well, as I run my business, And as I impact lives, are they the same values? Does it change?
Yeah.
And so I think
that they overlap. Yeah. You see, and that is one of the pieces. Now, obviously, depending for anyone listening, if you are a founder or the owner of a business, then my experience would say you're going to see your DNA and your values very much overlapping with the business. If you're a leader in an organization or working for someone else, the aspect here when we think about that connection between our personal core values and the business is that we're looking for those pieces where there's some beautiful synergy or overlap. You certainly don't want to be in a situation where there's a direct conflict or you're at odds with something, but you will have more of the overlap if you're the owner, founder, aspects of the business. I don't think they're necessarily exactly the same, but you'll see your DNA in it.
And most of the people that you work with are the founders, the CEOs, but also the leaders, or both?
Yep. So years ago, it was very much owner, founder. As things have shifted, we've gone more into speaking about business leaders because there are organizations, particularly because we focus on small to medium. So in that medium size, you might have 250 employees and you might be therefore working with a CEO who isn't a family member, who doesn't own the business, but is a leader. So all of our work is with people who are a decision maker in the business, but they don't necessarily have to be the owner or founder.
Mm-hmm. Can you hear the sound downstairs, Bessi? Isn't okay? Good. All right. No. Side note. Yeah. And so it's around helping to create meaning. And even for leaders, if they aren't the founders and didn't set the foundational values, so to speak, they also get the opportunity to be in their own self-reflection of which of these values are meat that I can bite into and which ones don't totally align, but then gives them an opportunity to be in their own introspection and exploration.
Yeah, and if
to
you
get clear on where their values are.
Yeah, and if you get into the importance of, we spoke about the fact that most people, even if you went back to an origin story and you were leading an organization that you didn't found and that you don't own, when you dig into that origin story, when you pull out the richness of what are those core values that have been present and that are in the organization, because it's not likely that they have been really well described or pulled into how do we actually behave. What you can be part of is that design work, if you like, the creation, the articulation of what is this, and that can be a task that's done in the here and now by yourself and your team and people who are living and breathing and experiencing the business as it is. Yeah. So I think these pieces are never done. If it's done well, values shouldn't be something that then you present to the organization and they have to learn them and ask questions. Like it should be that when it is brought up, they go, that's us. Like I see that, I've experienced that. If it's something you're trying to project onto people, and this goes to Lencioni's work around, often we call something a core value, but it's actually an aspirational value, or it's actually some other type of value, because he has 4 types. And that's part of the exploration work to do, is sometimes we might go, we can actually see and identify here that there are values that we don't have that are not core. They're not part of our behavior currently. But if we are to succeed as a business in the future, we're going to need to learn to bring those in. So let's call them what they are, aspirational. They're not core. But let's then have the conversation as a team or an executive to work out what are the conscious, intentional steps we're taking to move from them being aspirational to being a fundamental part of who we are. That's a helpful distinction.
Well, and it feels like this whole, it's cliche, but slow down to speed up, but also just to throw a wider net. This is for a parent who is trying to navigate how they want to show up in marriage and parent children, or if you're navigating career changes, or if you want to move to a different geography, to slow down, to go, what are our core values, and use those for boundary setting and decision making and how we show up as leaders in a community, what schools we choose to put our children in. I mean, it really, it seems like it encompasses all of it for through the lens of preventing burnout.
Yes.
Because the flip side is if we're just running around saying yes to everything, there's your burnout for you.
Exactly. And it is that piece, the other element that I love about taking this approach to our lives more broadly. So as you said, whether it's in the relational context, our families, work, any element, the element that I love about it is that it means we never land in a position where we're saying, this is the answer. What it means is it's about a framework or a way of thinking that allows you to get clearer on your answers plural, because it's more than one, and also it's personal, because you and I could do this exact same work and we are going to land on different priorities, different values. We will make different decisions in our families and in our businesses. And it doesn't mean that you're aligned and I'm not, or vice versa. It just means we have different foundational elements that are the critical drivers for our decisions. And that is really important to me. And in designing something like the Jasper Blueprint or having conversations around values, I always want to make sure people realize this isn't me or someone else telling you or giving you the answers. It's about the slow down to speed up comment you made of create that space, prioritize it enough to take the time and get to your own answers, because they are the filters that then mean you can make decisions. And, you know, whether they're things like Brad and I over the years have had lots of conversations where you say, oh, you know, someone else might be questioning your choice to spend a whole stack of money on a particular trip or adventure. And Brad would, you know, say, oh, should I be spending this money? And I'd say, well, given one of our core values is adventure and curiosity, and there's these elements that are foundational to who we are and what we prioritize, you would actually be out of alignment if you were trying to fit into someone else's box. That is a decision that is absolutely critical for us. So like you said, it is just that piece of, yes, it's about values, but it's about them as that filter. It's about them, you know, I always talk about a touchstone. We need to be grounded in something. It's hard to not get overwhelmed and not get burnt out when you have nowhere to turn or nothing to do that element of either ground you, or your example of the Karens, of being able to give you that guide to say, are we tracking in the right direction?
Yeah. And I imagine there's people listening going, yeah, easy for you to say, I'm working my tail end off. Business has been hard. Cash flow is tight. I'm already burning the candle at both ends. I don't have the time for this. Yeah. Bringing more meaning into business is quote unquote nice. But how do I rank that on top priority when I can't even make payroll? And so how do you help individuals in some form, they're in some narrative similar to that, to shift the gaze a little bit? And like, what do you say to that individual?
So I think a lot of people are in that space and have been, particularly in the last few years, because the reality of the market that we're in is that it is very tight and the struggle is real for a lot of businesses. The reality for me is this is where I have a very different conversation with business leaders than others do, because when we talk about something like meaning or contribution, the natural tendency is in that way that you've described it to think, okay, well, this is something I would love to have that conversation one day when I sell the business or when we're highly profitable. It's a sense of this as an additional nice to have piece for those who are in a privileged position. The reality of the current market that we operate in and the shifts I try to help people realize is that the piece that is going to give you a competitive advantage and actually help you to have a more stable, robust business in the current market is if you are super clear on what you bring as an organization. So understanding what differentiates you so that you know how to position yourselves and draw the right people to you. And the more that is clearly articulated and understood within your organization, and the more you then communicate that in the right way to your ideal customers, what you see in this aspect of the piece that I frame as what the purpose of business is, when you can shift out of that profit maximization, which keeps you in the fear and scarcity of, oh my goodness, I have to just focus on how do we bring more revenue in? How do we reduce our costs? So you stay in that very limited space. When you shift over to this aspect that I talk about, where it's know the value you bring as an organization, understand the value customers want, and then capture value in return, right? So when we think about our business model, what will allow those things to build out a strong, robust business that is going to sustain you in the current market is actually the opposite of that fear-based, one-dimensional profit maximization piece. It's a deep understanding of how to position your uniqueness as a business, a deep understanding and respect for your customers, and then having that business model that underpins it, which allows you to bring those things together. And so the work that I do when people are in that very stressful position of just trying to make payroll, as you said, and kind of, I have to make the business just stack up and I can't have these additional conversations, is letting them rest into the fact that this isn't a distraction, this is your strategy, right? So this is us saying, okay, how are we going to actually leverage genuine competitive advantages like increasing our recurring revenue or making sure that referrals are really consistent because we've built that into our business model in a way that adds the meaning, but that also makes us money, right? So the unapologetic connecting of those two things is at the heart of this. While ever we keep it in a category of it's a nice to have, like how do we help, that will feel like it's a one-day conversation. I'd love to have that, but now is not the time. It's in the merging these things back together that you actually start to realize that's how you're going to have the security that you're actually looking for, which the truth is the one-dimensional approach and the focus on profit is not actually achieving for you.
So it's no longer a one day, but it needs to be a now. I was thinking it would be fun. I would just pulled up the values, mission, and vision that you and I came up with.
Oh, yes, for your...
I thought it would be fun just to read it.
Yeah, go for it.
And so this is with Bessi's support. Here's what I came up with. So 4 values. 1 is loving communication. 2 is let the Karens be the guide. 3 is held within the landscape of our moral compass. And 4 is embrace magic and possibility. The mission we came up with is our mission is to become a beacon of light that inspires and leads in ways that rise the tide, leading by example with gratitude, hope, perseverance, and love, raising up women around the world so they pour more lovingly and wholeheartedly into themselves and all they serve. The vision being a world that remembers community is vital, self-care and health paramount, where leaders show up authentically, prioritizing abundance and balance in health, wealth, and love. So good, right? And then we wrote out actual, like, clear descriptions of those 4 values. So thank you. Thank you for helping me.
Can I pull those apart a little bit for a moment?
Yeah.
If we've got time. I think, I don't know if anyone else did this, but as you were reading it, there was a few bits where I kind of found myself just closing my eyes, right? Because it's that bit of like, actually listen to it. And if you think about, yes, what Maraya just read, there was a lot of words, right? So there's detail in there. But if you go back to the piece that we talked about at the beginning of, we are operating in a space where we're like being bombarded with so many different things and, oh my goodness, how do I make this decision? How would I prioritize whether that is a good use of time or money? How do I boil down all of these decisions and options being thrown at me? The detail and the description in what Maraya read, and then, as she said, behind that, there are then descriptions for each of the core values. What that gives you is an ability to come back to those articulations, have them front of mind as you're going through your day or as you're making these decisions. And if you compared that to having a poster on the wall that said integrity, well, how would Maraya or her team go, okay, so here's the 25 decisions that just came in on all of these emails. Integrity. Well, I don't know what to do with that. Like I cannot use that as a filter. Whereas the pieces that were read out, now, yes, they have deep meaning to Maraya and her team. Your organisation is going to be different, but there is a richness, there is meat on the bones of that means that as you think through a decision or an opportunity, you're able to look at that and say, does that feel that it is in alignment? Does that feel like it's moving me closer to that vision that's being described that I want to be part of creating in the world? Would speaking at this event potentially help move us in that direction? Would bringing on this new client or creating a partnership with this organisation, does that beautifully sit within that description of our mission? And if it does, automatically there's that relaxing of like, great, I can make that decision. And so I think while you might go, oh my gosh, that's a lot, it actually is that piece of, it makes it easier to boil things down because there's depth and description there. And I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. And it helps me as a founder and CEO lead and lead the team. But also, I think consumers now are using much more discernment with what companies they buy from, what coaches they hire, and they want to really be able to deeply understand the values and integrity of the individual, because over the last, especially in the coaching world, over the last few years, it got bombarded. Pandemic happened and everybody became a coach, whether or not they have any expertise or ability. And so for consumers and buyers to be able to have a place to land and to use the discernment. Now, we created this together. I haven't done anything with it. I haven't shared it publicly, but I could see how there might be value in finding a way for nuances of this to be shared publicly, so that as you listeners are going, what is this women's vibrancy code? And what do you mean she hosts retreats and does programs and can order my hormones? How do I even know if, her values align? And like, what a great questions to be asking.
Yeah.
As business leaders and as consumers.
Yeah. And the answer to, because I get to ask that question a lot. There's some of my podcasts go into that, and actually the podcast that's coming out today talks about this element of that shift that has occurred. When I think about, I ran for many years an incubator that was for startup organizations that had a social or environmental mission at the heart of what they did. And back then, almost always, I was telling the founders not to lead publicly in the market with their values or mission, because at that point it was really rare for that to be one of the value propositions for why a customer would engage with you. But that has definitely shifted. So, your comment of now people are looking for that alignment and genuinely judging and choosing where they put their dollar based on that alignment. Now, you still have to do the element, if you go back to when I described that purpose of business, know the value you bring as an organization, understand the value customers want. When you're making that decision of which parts of my values or my mission or my vision should I share with my customers or with the market, that comes down to how well do you understand the value customers want from you. Because you share only what is relevant. What happens is if you make it all about you and your whole website is like, I'm passionate about this and I love this and this is my mission, that's off-putting. The sharing and the way you share, what you share and the level of detail you share needs to be absolutely informed by your understanding of your customer and speaking into the things that are important to them and what will help draw the right people to you and hopefully put off the wrong people. But it's not just a blanket statement. When you're describing or developing something like a Jasper blueprint or your core values, I wouldn't want someone to be doing that as an external facing document, like that it's about marketing or how you describe things externally. The articulations you get to will mean that you will do a much better job of then doing that external facing work, but it isn't its first initial purpose is not about an external facing marketing document. That can come later based on what is worth and important to the market to hear.
So good. I'm aware of time. I heard Bessi mentioned her podcast, so the Jasper Blueprint podcast. I'll make sure in the show notes. Her website is bessigraham.com, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Bessi, anything that you want to say that feels unsaid, or kind of close a loop on anything that we spoke about? And then also for listeners who are leaning in and they're wanting to learn more, what is the best way to kind of lean into your work, reach out to you, listen to, consume more, give them some direction?
Yeah. Look, the one easy next step is to just go to the website, bessigraham.com, because there you will find links to the website, to the podcast. You'll find next free masterclass we have. You'll find resources to download. So the exploration, if you're curious of how do I start to think about this more and explore that from that curiosity, the website is the best place, so bessigraham.com, and feel free to then reach out to me from there. I think the last piece is more a reminding, just bringing us back. We've obviously had a wide-ranging conversation, but I would love for people just to be encouraged on that point that we made around, even if you're feeling a bit lost, or like the business or the work you're doing is not deeply connected to things that are important or purposeful for you, I encourage you to start to explore these things and think about and ask these questions, because I genuinely am confident to say that it's closer than you think it is. And that when you tune in and start to be more intentional in how you name and articulate these things, in the same way that Maraya did in capturing pieces that were already present, they just hadn't been articulated in the same way, I think you will find that it's not so much, oh my goodness, we're asking you to do this additional massive task and you're already stretched and overwhelmed. It will actually be something that can, much quicker than you thought, get you to a place where your experience of the business is different, and where you're able to then get back to the passion and energy of, I always talk about reclaiming the reins and going, okay, like I'm on track and I now know how to make these decisions with the confidence that they are in alignment with what matters most to me. And so this clarity is really important in helping you get back to that place.
I appreciate you. I appreciate the gifts that you provide in the world and the ways in which you support, business endeavors to be able to create profitability and meaning and purpose and values at the same time, and to remind us all that it's all possible.
Yeah.
And that we can use these to navigate our lives and navigate the decisions that we make and the things that we say yes to and the things that we say no to. As, sometimes, I don't know about you, but for me, being a CEO and a founder at times does not feel easy. And I'm navigating very uncharted territory. And sometimes I feel like I'm in a big weathering storm. So Thank you for your support.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad to have had this conversation. I do hope it's helpful for people.
Yeah. And like she said, like Bessi said, if you have enjoyed this conversation, find her website, bessigraham.com, reach out there. And she's an absolute delight to work with. All right. Ciao, ciao, everybody.